Help! Get me out of here! These fish don't like my song! Have you ever been singing at a live gig and your monitor sounded like you're singing in a swimming pool or an aquarium? Undoubtedly, the monitor mix has too much reverb. Adding reverb gives the sound of a sense of space. A wet reverb sounds like you're further away. A dry reverb sounds much closer to the listener. Imagine the sound of a single voice in an auditorium versus a single voice in a small room. The differences are due to sound waves bouncing off the walls or objects near it. Choosing what type and how much to use is dependent on many variables. In a live setting, it depends on the venue, instrument being played, style of music, your personal taste, and most important, your own ear. Generally, you will want it to sound natural. You recreate these very same parameters when using reverb in a recording. The two types of reverb in the DAW are algorithmic and convolution. Most DAWs will come with an algorithmic reverb. Think of it like a synthesizer, where a mathematical equation is formulated to represent the characteristics of sound in a particular space. That equation is known as the algorithm. This basic reverb is pretty easy to create, but very hard to master. Although this is an imaginary reverb, the algorithms come from analyzing the way acoustic spaces really sound and how they affect sound. Though you are limited to the chosen algorithm, there is a lot of flexibility to manipulate the sound by changing the algorithm's parameters. But because they are only simulating the impulse responses, they can tend to sound fake. That is why it's best to generally not use algorithmic reverb with solo instruments unless you have a very high-end unit and really know how to use it. To create a realistic algorithmic sound, you must really be aware of how things sound in different spaces. Convolution reverbs are similar to a keyboard sampler and use real sound samples, most often recorded from real rooms. They use multiple microphones to capture the acoustics of a real room or space and digitally simulate the reverb in that space to produce an IR, or impulse response file. The reverb plugin filters your sound through this impulse response to generate a believable sound based on the true characteristics of a real room. Where algorithmic reverbs are more imaginary and more flexible, convolution verbs are more realistic and less flexible. I use a TC Helicon Voice Tone R1 vocal tuned reverb pedal. This is a great convolution reverb with typical settings for area, ambiance, studio, room, club, theater, place, and hall. It also has a dry-wet knob to simulate the sound that is close or further away. In most of my songs, I will choose a studio or room verb with the knob a little more dry than wet, but on the emotional, haunting ballads, I'll either make the sound more wet and or change to club or theater. Now this same thing can apply in your recordings. Keep in mind that this type of reverb in a DAW takes up more space on your computer, and adding convolution reverb to each track roughly doubles the amount of CPU. This is because the process for these types of reverbs involves running filters over your signal and mixing that with another signal. Be aware of this and use them sparingly. Also, remember that lower frequencies tend to penetrate surfaces and higher frequencies tend to bounce off surfaces, which is essentially the effect we're trying to produce. Convolution reverbs tend to exaggerate the impulse response from your sound. Think of it as the collision between a sound and the surrounding material. If this is not set up correctly, it can cause your bass to build up much faster than what happens in algorithmic reverbs. This can be a big problem if a convolution verb is not used correctly. When deciding which reverb to use, it is best to use your ear and know what things really sound like in various spaces. This way, you can really recreate that sound in just the right amount. Generally, you will use convolution reverb on solo instruments because they help fill the sound out where there aren't many other things going on in your track. More instruments can cover up the reverb, and that will often create a muddy sound. The more instruments you have, the more you can get away with a strictly algorithmic reverb. It is also important to note that sampled instruments often have a small amount of natural room sound already in them, so using a small amount of algorithm reverb can really add a nice sound. In closing, be subtle when using reverb so that it creates the sound you want without distracting from the music. As in every added effect in the recording process, a little can go a long way. Choosing the right sound can make or break your recording, and knowing which reverb to use is extremely important.